Hi, Peter Charles here, Folk for Life Fly Fishing, and welcome to my next video on simplified steelheading. Today we're going to do a fly in a color scheme that I've used many times over the years, and I use it in a particular type of water condition. Our river goes from like a murky brown color in the early part of steelhead season and transitions into a more of a classic steelhead green river as we get into November and things cool off, the weeds die off, and the river clears out. And I move through a color shift. Now, some colors I keep all year round, black and white being obvious ones, but I move into other colors as the water changes. So when it's murky, I might be relying on browns, purples, oranges, reds. And as we get into the green stage of the water, I'm looking more at fluorescent yellows and fluorescent chartreuse, along with black. I'll use some other colors in there as well, but generally speaking, I'm shifting from the warm colors into those cooler colors when the water goes from brown to green. And so black and yellow has been a mainstay of mine, along with black and chartreuse when it gets into November and December. This particular fly is just another way of mixing up those color schemes, and I'm doing it sort of space style, but it's going to be an easy fly to tie, and it's going to be using some speed techniques, some little cheats. So the idea is if you leave it on the bottom, you're not going to cry too hard. So let's look at the material that we're going to use. The hook is going to be the Bartlett Supreme in a size 2. Now we're going to use 2 threads on this fly. The first one is going to be this neon yellow from Unithread. It's quite coarse. It does a good job of replacing floss. It's rugged, and it's fluorescent. So we're going to start with that one. Then we're going to move to the rib, which is going to be Unifrench, and it's going to be this small gold. And then we're going to put our main thread on, which is this Vivus 10-aught fluorescent yellow. I use a lot of fluorescent colors, especially when the water goes green. On a dull day, they just glow. And then I'm going to use some fluorescent yellow Marabou to replace the typical spey feather. Like, we're not going to use heron. And what I'll do is I will trim the feather so it's trimmed to one side. And you can see there's very little in the way of webby barbs on that. I'm using a popsicle Marabou because it's a lot of fine barbs without a lot of fluff, and which is what I'm after. I want it to have that kind of spey look. And then I'm going to go with some yellow guinea, and again it's trimmed on one side. We don't want too much bulk with these because they don't sink well if they've got too much bulk, or they get held up in the current. And the wing is going to be the silver fox dyed black. So let's get going. First off, we're going to put on the yellow neon about there on the hook, because we're going to use the front part here for the spey palmering. I know it's not a real spey fly, but it's close. Now we'll put in our gold rib. And so I'm doing a double duty here. I am using the fluorescent yellow cord as both my thread and my floss, because it's quite thick. Keep going, bring it quite a ways down, around the bend, and bring it back. Make sure you're well covered and there's no black showing through when you're done. I'll just half hitch this at this point. Pull it nice and tight. Trim it off. Now I'm going to put on my fluorescent yellow thread. And I'm just going to wrap over where I did that half hitch, just to lock that into place so that doesn't fall out. Now I've got to mention something about this thread here. It doesn't have the bleed through problem that floss does. So I can put this over a black hook and have it basically stay chartreuse, sorry, not chartreuse, fluorescent yellow. Now we wind our rib. I like to use hackle pliers just to hold onto it. I'm going to put a little tiny tip on here to start with. It'll just come forward. Because of the curve of the hook, you have to move the rib backwards and forwards to end up with an even appearing spacing. Otherwise, if you just wound without moving it backwards and forwards, you end up with a spacing that is uneven. And you have to change it as you as the shank becomes more in line with the vise. Now we're going to put in our Marabou feather. Now our black yarn. I'll bring it to the back here, bring it forward. Now we wind on. Just bring it up on the return part of the way, because we need to leave room for our wing and our guinea hackle. Now we don't have a lot of Marabou to work with, so when you start to wind, space it widely so you have some room. Now you see how the hackle is going here. Just if you get some trap, just pick it out. Now we bring it to the front and we put a turn in that forms like a collar. So we stroke that back out of the way. I'm going to come in with our thread. There we go. Bring your thread to the back, and now for the guinea. I'm just going to take my bodkin and move some of these strands of Marabou out of the way, because you don't want to trap the Marabou when you're doing this. You want to keep them behind the guinea. Okay, the guinea, just stroke it back and wind it forward, touching turns. Try to avoid having barbs trapped. Try and keep them out of the way as much as possible. So when you bring it forward, they flare out nicely and they don't get trapped underneath and end up looking ugly. Here we go. And you can pick away at some of these to separate them. And we just push everything back. And sometimes it'll pop off and sometimes it won't. This one is in the won't category. Now, if you had a toothbrush handy, you could stroke that guinea so the barbs will separate. You can come in with your bodkin and pick them apart a little bit, because they do tend to clump up together. There we go. That's more like it. Now you can see how I've put the Marabou over black. It creates a little bit of a contrast between the Marabou and the black. So you've got the fluorescent yellow set against the black. So a little extra. Now for our wing, I'm going to use my silver fox. Now there's lots of short stuff in the bottom, so pick it out. You want basically the guard hairs and not the fur. Now we measure this basically the length of the Marabou, maybe a little bit longer. Trim it. Now the trim is not neat, so let me clean it up a little bit. If you don't have a nice neat trim, what happens is you get these bits sticking forward and it looks ugly. So now you've got the head in there. Just take a moment to make sure everything is straight and where it's supposed to be. I'll build that head up just a little bit so it's a little bit brighter, so the black doesn't shine through. Okay, we whip finish. Trim off, and now we're just ready for some head cement and to go fishing. It's an attractive fly, and that guinea tends to flare out a little bit when it's in the water, and that helps the Marabou to kick around. Also, the spotted look of that guinea adds to the effect, and you don't want to get too dense because, look, you've got all this lovely gold and fluorescent yellow back here. If you put too much material, it disappears. The fish won't see it. They won't see that contrast, you know, so everything gets lost. So you go a little bit simple with and sparse with the material, you'll get a different looking fly. The one I did before is a little bit denser, not much, just a little bit more. You try and get your materials the way you like it. I mean, if you are dealing with a turbulent river, I'd put more materials on it just so that it kicks around and doesn't flatten out. My local river is not that turbulent and is not that fast flowing, so sparser works better. The materials move better. If it's too bulky, it's just doesn't move that much because there's just so much stuff on the fly. So sparse works better in the slower currents. And as I say, in the faster currents, you need that bulk because if it's too sparse, it'll just flatten down. So there we go, the NoName Spey, simple fly. It gives you an opportunity to sort of do something that looks sort of like a Spey fly. And it's a black and fluorescent yellow. Works like a charm in my local river. As soon as that water goes that green color, I get this out. So give it a try. Cheers. Beautiful fish. Beautiful.